Umar, Aisha, me, and Maria are the test engineers working on this thread. So the agenda of the today's meeting is that I'll start with the introduction to BDD with Cucumber. Then Aisha will give introduction of API testing with Rest Assured. Then she'll demo integration of Rest Assured with Cucumber. After that, Maria will showcase the complex use case scenario that she has automated. And after that, Umar will jump in to discuss basic authentication and how we can integrate our automation scripts in DevOps. So, what is BDD? BDD, behavior driven development, is a software development approach that has evolved from test driven development. So, in BDD, what we do is in BDD is actually about simulating the application behavior from the end user perspective. Now, coming back to the TDD, what TDD actually is. So in TDD, what we do is we write test cases ahead of the application code, and we keep on doing this activity until all of our test cases are passed. So what was the issue that TDD has evolved to BDD? So imagine a scenario where all of the team members in a project team, all of them are technical and the client is technical as well. So in that case, TDD works well because all of the guys are technical. They understand very well the test cases that are written in the form of program. So where comes the main issue? The issue is that in the scenario when there are people that are non-technical, like POs, and the client that is not non-technical and they don't understand the programming languages. So here comes the BDD that is going to help to minimize the communication gap between the technical and non-technical team members. So BDD help us minimize the communication gap by writing the test cases in a form of simple, plain language that can be understandable by anyone. They are not technical or non-technical. So it eventually increases the visibility of the project to the client side, and finally we get the happy customers. Moving forward to the next slide. So now I'm going to explain the BDD flow in real life example. So for example, we have a project manager who is non-technical, and he gets a story from the client that he wants to get something developed. And from that story, he'll pick the acceptance criteria that is written in the form of as X, I want to do Y so that I can achieve C. From that acceptance criteria, he can pick the scenario, and from that scenario he can divide the scenario into the further test cases and write those test cases in the form of given, when, then in our feature file where he has to write the test cases. So in this way, the non-technical project manager can minimize the technical gap by writing the test cases in a simple plain English format. So moving forward, so we have two choices to enable BDD. In C Sharp, we have the implementation of BDD in a framework called SpecFlow, and in Java, we have that implementation in a framework called Cucumber. So we have chose Cucumber as we were using Java in our automation project, and Cucumber is a framework that enables the BDD behavior, and it is written in the Ruby language, and it can work across different technologies. The main beauty of the Cucumber is that it enables BDD in a way that it uses a plain English language called Gherkin that has a syntax like given, when, and then. Here I've put an example that I'm going to explain. In this example, what I'm going to do is what I want is that I want to see my ID on the dashboard. So as a non-technical member of the team, so I would write the test case like given I'm on the home page when I write my username, my email at the red Gmail, and then I enter my password like this, then I should see my email on the dashboard. See how simple it is to write the test cases for the non-technical members. So that's pretty much it on the introduction of Cucumber and BDD. Now I would request Aisha to continue from here.
Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Aisha, and I'm going to discuss the introduction to API testing and Rest Assured. And then I will move towards the integration of Rest Assured with Cucumber, and there will be a small demo. So the first thing is, what is an API? An API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's basically a way for different software components to communicate with each other. APIs access data from third party, and they basically hide the complexity. So if one application is communicating with another application, it doesn't need to know the underlying functionality of what's going on there. For example, we have the weather app in our phone. The weather app takes information from the weather channel or some other resource, and it just displays that information in our application. So that is an example of an API. Now, in a lot of computer software, in a lot of softwares, we have a layered architecture. This basically means we have different layers for different functionalities. We have a data layer, we have a service layer, which is known as the API layer, and then we have a presentation layer, which is known as the UI layer. These layers interact with each other. The UI layer takes, the business logic layer takes the data from the UI layer, performs operations on it, on the data layer, and then displays that information on the UI layer. Because the API or service layer directly touches both the data layer and the presentation layer, it presents the sweet spot for continuous testing in QA and development teams. And with the rise in cloud applications and interconnected platforms, API testing is a necessity. So I'm just going to briefly go over the benefits of using API testing. API testing is a type of integration testing because we are trying to test how our application communicates with another application. And the first benefit is that earlier testing. This basically means that we don't have to wait for an application to be finished or some functionality to be finished before we start testing. And as test engineers, we kind of know what this scenario is sort of like. We usually wait for a functionality to be finished before we start testing it. So we can start earlier testing because we just need to verify the response from the API. The second point is that there's a faster time to resolution. That means that if there is an error, we can usually catch it very quickly. And since it's in a defined spot, we know it's from the API. There's not a lot of debugging involved. We don't have to check if it happened from scenario A or scenario B. We know it's in the API, and the response usually gives us some information about what happened. The third thing is that the speed and coverage. We can cover a lot of the functionality if we're using API testing. And it's very fast as compared to other sorts of testing. So if we have an application that is sort of due in another amount of time, or it's due in the afternoon, if it's due in the afternoon, this basically means that if we're using API testing, it's going to take a very little amount of time as compared to other testing types to get those results. And the maintenance is great. This means that APIs are rarely ever changed. And even when they are, it's very controlled and it's very minimal. So we don't have to use a lot of updating, and a lot of maintenance isn't required. So this basically means that API testing sounds pretty sweet, right? We're going to talk about different API testing types. There are many types of API testing, and one of them is testing with a web service. And a web service is a unit of managed code that can be remotely invoked using HTTP. And there are different types of web services. We have the SOAP UI and we have REST. Now, I will discuss REST because that is what we used in our application. A lot of applications these days, they use client-server architecture, and I'm sure all of you are aware of what a client-server architecture is, but I'm just going to explain it anyway. We have a client that needs to talk to the backend, and the backend is the server, and the client needs to get data from the server to either do some operation on it or save that data. And this communication is done through the HTTP protocol. On the server, we expose many services that are accessible via HTTP. And the client can call these services by sending HTTP requests. Now, this is basically a web service. And a REST web service exposes their operations as a series of unique resources. A RESTful service are also called RESTful API, and they follow the rules of a REST specification. Now, what is REST? REST is basically representational state transfer. It's a way of how it's basically rules on how we communicate. And REST is a convention for building these HTTP services. And we use HTTP principles to do some operations. And the standard HTTP methods, which I will discuss later on, map to the 4 basic CRUD operations. And CRUD is basically create a resource, read it, update it, or delete it. Now I'm going to talk about HTTP methods. HTTP methods are basically, they have a verb name, and that name basically describes what they do. So we have HTTP GET, and from the name, we can tell that it is used to retrieve or get data from the servers at a specified resource. Then we have HTTP POST, and what this does is requests are used to send data to the API server to either create or update a resource. And this is not idempotent, and this I will just explain later on. Then we have HTTP PUT. And what this does is it sends the data to the API to create or update a resource, but this is idempotent, which means we can send a request a number of times and still receive the same response. And in HTTP POST and HTTP PUT, we send some parameters as well that we want to update a resource. So please add this data to update it or this data to create it. So we're sending a body as well along with the request. And then we have HTTP delete. And from the name, it suggests that it is used to delete a resource at a specified URL. Now I'm just going to show you the Swagger screenshot of the application under test. And our application has a few controllers, and these controllers are different functionalities it has. So it's just basically displaying the sort of HTTP methods that we have in our controllers. We have a get call for all of the pets. We have a get call for a specific pet type. We can either create a pet, update it, and delete it. So this is basically from our application. Now I'm going to discuss the power of REST Assured. REST Assured is basically a library that is used, that it allows us to use the REST API. We can write powerful, readable, and maintainable automated tests using REST Assured. It supports a given, when, then test notation, which means it's perfect when we use it with Cucumber. We can use test runners like JUnit and TestNG, and these are staples in any test engineer's skill set. It simplifies the testing and validation of REST APIs. And it does that because we have inbuilt methods that we can use, and it has solid support for HTTP. So we don't have to really work on building code from scratch. We can just use the methods that are available and achieve the results. Now I'm going to talk about integration of REST Assured with Cucumber, and I have a list of things that we need to integrate REST Assured with Cucumber. The first thing is we need some sort of framework. We need to add dependencies, and we need some of the Cucumber magic. The first thing is the framework. In our application, we used Spring Boot. We use Spring Boot because it's very compatible with REST Assured, and it's very easy to use. It allows us to run applications and not really worry about what sort of configuration we're using. We don't really need to worry about that. Once we got the application down, we got it from Spring Initializer, which basically helps us generate a Spring Boot application. And we can specify if we need a Maven application, if we need Kotlin, if we need Java 8, Java 11, the Spring Boot type. We can specify all of that. And we got the Spring Boot application from Spring Initializer. Then we need to add some dependencies, which I will show later on. And we have the feature file, the step definition, and the glue, which basically makes the application run. I'm going to move towards the demo, and please let me know when you see my screen. Can everyone see the IDE?
Oh, yes, now we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm going to start with the dependencies. Dependencies are added in the POM file. And the first one we needed was we needed Spring Framework, we needed Spring Boot, we needed Rest Assured to perform Rest Assured operations. We needed Cucumber. Along with Cucumber, we needed JUnit, Cucumber with Spring, Cucumber with Gherkin. And we have this really neat reporting plugin. What this plugin allows us to show the report of all the test cases that we have added. It's a really nice report that is great for sharing in any project. You can just run the test and you can show the report that these are the results. So I'm going to move towards the feature file. Now, what is a feature file? A feature file is the entry point to the Cucumber test. And this is a file where you describe the test in the Gherkin language. And this is, as Saman explained, a very simple and descriptive language. And the purpose of the feature keyword is to provide a high-level description of the software feature or the group of software features. So in our case, we have the owner controller functionality, which basically shows that in our application under test, the owner controller features are written in this file. And then we have a feature file can contain a scenario or can contain many scenarios. And in our file, you can see that we have all of the owner controller features in this file. We have the positive cases as well as the negative cases in this file. Then we have the step definitions file. Now, what is a step definition file? This file is a step definition is basically a Java method with an expression that links it to one or more Gherkin steps. That means when Cucumber executes a Gherkin step in a scenario, it looks for a matching step definition to execute. So in our feature file, you can see that I have a base URL. And in step definition, it finds that method, I have a base URL, and executes it. So as you can see on the bottom half of my screen, I have the Cucumber runner test. You can see this tab over here. And you can see that all of our test cases passed, which is great. And you can see the time taken to execute over here. And you can see the log over here that we executed this, and this is the response. We have the positive test case over here. And then we have the negative test case, which is a response code 404. So we're trying to get a resource from the server that doesn't exist, and the response from the server is not found. And this test case passed because we're testing the positive scenario as well as the negative scenario. And this is basically the effort we put in for our test automation. Now I'm going to switch towards the report. Can everyone see the report?
Yes.
Okay, so we have the features tab over here, and this basically shows us that these are our features. We had the owner controller functionality, we had the pet type controller functionality, and it passed. We can see scenarios. We had 8 scenarios for each. It passed, and the steps that were executed. The steps are basically the step definitions that we used in our step definition file. It just shows the occurrences, the time taken, and the path, and if it's passing or not, the ratio of the pass. And in this tab, we have the failures. And since all of the test cases passed, there are no failures to show here. So this is our reporting mechanism, and this is it from my side. Mario will continue and give the demo and the presentation. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, Assalamualaikum, Maria Nasser here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
So I'm going to continue from the complex use case of feature. So let me start with our daily routine of the QAs, like every day QAs face different kind of challenges whenever they are given a new feature to be tested or any other new requirement. So it could be possible that in a feature we have some different challenging, complex kind of a scenario. We come with different testing approaches and then we execute that approach and then we analyze our result. So that is what is our daily challenges inside a feature. So in our pet clinic, we also face some different kind of challenges and scenarios. The challenge is that we have an endpoint of specialities in which we are going to verify that our specialty is to be unique, and it should be added, and it could be deleted, it could be updated. And the reason that this challenge I'm going to tell you about is like when we move to higher environments like production and staging, we don't want our data to be disturbed by our testing. So in order to make sure that our data is not being disturbed by our testing, we create our own data, we perform different kind of operations on them, and finally we delete that after completing our testing, so it doesn't have any impact on others data. So the solution is like we get all the specialities, we verify that the specialty which we are going to add exist or not. If that is verified, then we are going to add it, and if it is added successfully, we are going to update it and delete it. Okay, so coming to the next slide, I'm going to also tell you about the different profiles which we have created in this our pet clinic endpoint. So what was the reason of creating the different profile is like that as a QA, like we have faces a lot of problem regarding to data. When we come on QA environment, when we have dev environment, we have so many environments to test on, and we have to like change data according to the environment we are on. Like simple example is like username and password, I have to give different updated again and again in my test cases, and then I have to log in through that credentials in different environments. So to reduce that problem and to save the time for the testers, we have created different data profiles for different environments. So it is just a one time effort, we have to create data one time, and then we are going to use it again and again for different environments by just activating our that data profile. So we have created different data profiles for QA and dev, and we can also activate any profile by default in our project, or we can change the profile by the command line. We can change it by simply setting the default or by programmatically. So let me move to the demo. And the third thing I'm going to explain is about the utility classes, which I'm going to tell in my project. So everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the feature that I have written of update speciality, which I've explained in my slides as well. So the feature file is very generic. It is very easy to read for the stakeholders, but our complex logic is behind that, which is in the step definition. We are not adding any if and else condition in our feature file. It's just for the stakeholders. So our feature file should be generic as much as possible. Okay, so first I'm also over here getting all the specialities and verifying that this hand surgery exists already in our endpoint or not. And then I'm going to add it, and then I'm going to update it with major hand surgery, and then I'm going to delete that major hand surgery. So coming up to the different profiles is that I have created different profiles of dev and QA. So the dev contains its own specific URL. The QA also contains its own specific URL according to the environment. You can add your own variables inside it according to the environment you have. So over here, spring.profile.active is equal to dev. At this time, my the profile that is activated, that is the dev environment. You can also set your default environment over here. It could be QA, it could be staging and production, and so on. Then moving it to our data file. So we have different environment specific data. So for update specialty features, I have named this as dev, and I have named domain and endpoint. This is the data that is related to the dev in this key value form pair. You can also add one more entry over here with the name of a QA, and you can give QA specific related data. You can give staging specific related data. So we have written our customized utilities, which are going to read this data file, and then they are going to map it in our parameters building utility. So first of all, what our project does is like read the data file, and whatever the profile is activated, it will read that profile specific data and map it in our feature data model, which is our entity class. And then what does it do is we have a parameter building utility. It is our own written customized utility class which we are using for building the URL of our different specific environments. And we can also pass over here query parameters, and query parameters key and value would be passed accordingly. It's just our customized based hash map. And then the third utility which we have written is our rest assured utility. Here actually we are calling our all operations of delete, post, put, get operations, and this utility actually returns our response body to the step definition on which we can apply different assertions, we can verify our data, and so on things. That's it from my side. I'm Omar. You can start your from here.
Hi everyone, I am Umar here, and in this part of the presentation, we will be talking about the authentication types. Like sometimes on the server side, we have implemented authentication for the security purposes. So REST Assured provides following authentications, including basic authentication, digest, form, auth 1, and auth 2. But in this scope of the presentation, we will be discussing only basic authentication. Okay. In basic authentication, we are required to send only two fields, that is user ID or username and password. And both these fields are sent in the base64 encoding, and that encoding is not required to be done by user or developer. That is handled by the REST assured in the transport layer to ensure security and to ensure that our data does not get decrypted before sending it to the server side. And secondly, the credentials are sent with the request, and that's very easy. Here's a simple demonstration in which we are sending a request to the server but without sending our authentication. So it will give us a response of unauthorized or 401. But when we send the request with the credentials, valid credentials and authentications, it will send us a response and send us the required body or data. So next we will show that how we can integrate it in REST assured. It's pretty simple. Uh, as we know that REST assured is written in given when then format also, which is BDD for REST assured. So in it, it's very easy to integrate authentication. Here we can see that we are using .auth and we are sending basic username and password with the request, and it will give us the required response. Next thing is serialization. First, we need to understand that whenever, let's say, we are sending a post request, we can send a JSON structure converted to string in the body and referring it to as type of application slash JSON, and we can get the required response. The second most simple and better approach is to send an object, in which in Java we call POJO, plain old Java object. And in this technique, we just create a new object of a type. For example, here we created a object student of the class student, in which we have name and grade and marks, and we are simply sending our object with the request and just referring it to the type application slash JSON. The framework will automatically convert this student to the JSON object and will pass it to the server and will get the results for us. So it's pretty simple, pretty easy, and very maintainable. Next is deserialization. Conversely, when we send the request with our class object, it's serialization. But when we get the response from the server and maybe we get some JSON object and converting it to our own class, this is called deserialization. So it's very easy and helpful. For example, if we send a response on server and it sends us a very complex JSON structure, so with deserialization, we can map it to our own class, for example, student in this example. And in this way, we can easily provide assertions, verifications, comparisons. Maybe we are sending a request to get our token, maybe authentication token, and we can store it in any field of our class. And later we can use that token to access our API. So deserialization and serialization, they makes our development, our lives very easier when it comes to testing the APIs. Next thing is, like we have developed all the automation test. The main important part now is its integration with Azure DevOps. Now with Azure DevOps, we follow a simple flow in which we keep a separate repo for maintaining our automation code, and when our actual application get deployed, we just simply write a bash script to get pull from our automation code, and that after that we'll use a maven command to just run the test from our automation code. And depending on the result, we can do different actions. For example, uh, we can send the report, we can save report at any storage account, we can there are many post deployment options. For example, if our automation test fails, we can revert the actual app. So there are many configurations and many settings supported. Next, we will show you a simple flow diagram explaining how we are implementing. Like we discussed, after the deployment of the actual application, we are using a bash script to get a pull from our functional test repository. We will be using Maven commands to run those test cases. And with the help of that Maven command, we can also specify the environment. We can also specify the we can even run a single feature file. We can run complete feature files or set of feature files. That's pretty easy. And after that, there will be execution. And as Aisha showed us an HTML report, we can simply share that HTML report in email. We can also share that HTML report in blob storage, because sometimes the size or size of the report is very large and we just prefer to store it in blob storage. And after sharing that report to blob storage, we can share the link to that file in email or on FTP. So that's a pretty simple flow of how we can implement functional tests with Azure DevOps. So that's pretty much from my side. Thank you. And now we will be answering questions, and you can also ask your questions in chat also.
Okay, I'd just like to add that for the question and answer session, whenever someone's asking a question, apna please naam pehle bata dein so that we can have a record of who's asking. And okay, let's start now.
Okay, so Aksam here. I have a question from Aisha. So Aisha, you have explained about the feature files and the step definition. So I believe there will be multiple feature files and there will be multiple step definitions. So how the Cucumber or the system will know which feature file it is implementing in which step definition file? How we are giving it a connection?
Okay, thank you for your question, Aksam. In our scenario, we have a feature directory. In that feature directory, we have multiple features. So we can have one controller, we can have as many controllers as we want. And in each feature file, we can have as many features as we want. So if we have a user controller, and the user controller, it's a feature file. You can add the test cases for updating a user, creating a user, deleting a user, getting the user. So you can add all of them there. And in the step definition file, what we used is we have many feature files, but we have one step definition file. And in one step definition file, you can just link what the feature file scenario is. So if I have a base URL, if that is written in the feature file, you can have a step definition file with the same format. I have a base URL, and then you can write your function in there. And the Cucumber runner test, basically the glue it tells the system where the feature file is located, where the step definition file is located, and how you can connect them together. So that would be my simple response to this question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And also, you guys have talked about only put, post, get, delete. So, are these only the functions that being supported here, or like this is all the other functions or methods of the HTTP are being supported also here? Like if we're going to check for the options or the patch, these are all the methods of the HTTP.
Aksam, I think you can also add those functionalities. For example, we for put, post, delete, we have added our custom functionality in the step definition files and its helper classes. So if you want to add for let's say patch, you need to just add a simple function and write a feature file referring to that step definition. So that's your own implementation in step definition and its helper utility classes.
Okay. So, are there any challenges being attached with this sort of testing with API testing using REST assured? Are there any challenges that they're like which we should know?
Yes, Aksam, I think just can you please elaborate about challenges? What exactly are you trying to ask? Maybe about configurations or setups or whatever.
Like I'm asking from the perspective of this encoding serialization or deserialization part from the end part. Like when you are integrating with the DevOps or like from this perspective.
Okay. So the thing is, we can include serialization in our example as well. For example, as Maria or Aisha was getting a response from the server, they were deserializing that and using assertions or maybe verifications or comparisons. But this thing is not very specific to this project. I mean, it's a general concept in which we just serialize our data or deserialize our data so that our complex JSON, which you may have observed in uh, Java that it's very tricky. You have a lot of colons in that structure and all that. So with deserialization, you have every field of that object mapped to your class. For example, if you have a class student, you can simply get student.id, student.class, and you can easily compare it. So it's not very specific to this project, but it's a very good concept of uh, Java, or I have also implemented in C Sharp, so it's very helpful. It's not very specific to this project only.
Okay.
I'd like to add to that, Aksam. I have had the Shahid here. I have had the experience of working with Cucumber. There is one challenge though, and that's the it was mentioned that it's a row mapping. Like you mentioned a row number and that it's mapped to the e-feature file, right? So when it comes to actually doing some changes, there comes the slight, let's say, a challenge of actually managing it because it becomes a little too uh, complex to actually manage it and actually map that one-on-one while you change any test case or you emit any test case. So for that, we were discussing and we came up with the approach of actually skipping the data and adding a new row instead of, if, for example, if a test gets, let's say if a test is no longer valid, uh, the feature has changed or there has been an improvement in the code and a particular test case is no longer valid, isn't done is or doesn't run like that. So instead of going into the feature file and changing the whole feature file, every single row number and every single um, every single data set, we just skipped that particular test from the feature file and that let it data sit in the data file. So that allowed us to actually, not do so much change and mess up the whole sequence of things, because it becomes very hard to actually map one on one manually.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi Omar, I have a question.
Hi.
In
Yes.
Hamza here. Actually, I want to ask that if in a future file, you guys have how you guys are managing the line by line. If a line have if some feature files have same common line, we are passing a string and with same line, and string is a parameter. So how you guys are managing this same line, because one line maps one function, and a function performing a different action.
Okay. Hamza, the thing is, in Cucumber, when we are writing same lines in different features, it will map to one function. Okay. So you are asking about, please navigate back to feature file. Uh, Okay, you can see here, for example, we have written here and specialty. Okay, let's see. Then response code should be 200, or let's say then response code should be 204. So it will get mapped to the same function, but the framework will itself pass a simple argument which is integer. So depending on depending on our statement from the feature file, it will get mapped here. For example, from their feature file, it will write the response code should be 200 and response code should be 400. Both these lines will get mapped to only one function here in step definition, that is response code should be. Okay, so here the framework for itself just specified the type integer. So whatever the integer we passed from the feature file, it will get mapped here. So you can see the inner body as well. In assertion, we have not passed any hardcode data. We are just comparing the data coming from feature file with our actual response. Is that
Uh,
clear?
uh, uh,
Just to add a little bit more, like apart from this example that Umar just showed, like which is a generic function, uh, for both the step for both the steps, the request will come to this function. Uh, Generally, when if you're like if we exclude this whole parameter thing like 204 or 200 thing, like if you are writing a step definition that is exactly the same as in some other feature, then essentially it means that you actually want to test the same thing. Your intention is the same. So if you have the exact same thing and you want to test something different, ideally I think you should have some sort of different wording in your step that would differentiate between the two. Otherwise, if it's exactly same, then it means that your intention or you are you want to test the same thing, and that ideally should be one single function. So if you want to test two different things, your step definition should also imply that there should be some hint of that. Okay, I want to do this, and this is something different in these two step definitions, right?
Thank you.
Uh, Asad here. Basically, we are also working in touch adventures team on Cucumber and rest assured. So the question related to duplicate steps that Hamza has asked. Basically, we are facing this challenge currently in the project. When we have multiple features, like we have more than 100 APIs, and we are going to automate that, so it is pretty much difficult to make sure that every feature has different steps in grammatically, or sentence written in the steps are different grammatically, or some sort of hint whatever we need to do. So here I just was working using Spring, that we can add dependency and manage our duplicate steps. Is there any way you guys have gone through during your this task or demo?
uh, who exactly was that? we missed your name. If you could also tell your name.
Asad.
So Asad, I don't think we went through this sort of dependency which could give this sort of a feature of managing duplicate steps, because it was like a initial introduction of Spring Boot, Rest Assured, Cucumber for the team, and they were trying to experience the flavor of Java and programming for the very first time. So we didn't go through that. I think it would be a nice sharing if you could share that library. We would definitely explore it and see what we can get out of that.
Sure.
Hi, Abdullah here. I have a question for Umar. Umar, in your integration with DevOps slide, you mentioned that you have created a separate repository for the automation code. So I wanted to ask if that is a necessity, or you can add the automation code in the same repo as your API or any other code.
Yes, Abdullah, you can have your automation code in the same repo as your actual application. But the thing is that we just want to keep it a bit clean. So a separate repo for functional tests would be fine, so that in case of any future changes or any changes in the approach, any changes in the API testing, any changes in the feature file, so that all will be managed separately in the separate code repo, not in the same app repo, because that's the actual repo, and we don't want to change that or disturb that in our process of updating functional tests and so.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
One more question, Hamza here. Is there any specific reason that you guys are mapping all the features file in a one-step definition class file? Is there any specific reason for that?
Uh, Hamza, it all depends on how bigger your project is and how complex your project is and how you want to manage things. For example, as you can see on screen, there are three feature files, and there are pretty much maybe 5, 6, 7 functions managing all those feature files. So we just decided to keep it in one step definition, but there's no harm or no issue in creating more than one step definition file, since this is all code in a class path. So feature file will always know which step definition to refer to. So it depends on you. Uh, I mean, it's no harm. You can create another step definition as well, but it's for you to maintain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Aksam here. So again, I have a question. From this thing, which you have told Umar just right now. So if you are giving a
Okay.
new step definition, yeah. So if you are creating a new class or new Java code for a step definition for a new feature file, so you have to update the glue property as well somewhere. That means, like, my question is basically, for every feature file there will be a step definition class. So it means, like, they will have a their own glue property somewhere defined, or we have to just add the glue property in the previously defined glue property. So how will we manage that thing?
Aksam, the thing is, one feature file necessarily does not mean to have a one step definition file. Maybe my feature file or my feature have 4 sentences, and all those 4 sentences are in different step definitions. So that will run similarly. There's no difference in that. First thing is that. The second thing is, in our Cucumber Runner class, we know that our step definitions are in class path. We just has to specify the location of our features. So it will automatically find all the step definitions and will run accordingly. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
I would just like to add a point here. Asad Ilyas again. Basically, if we have multiple, step definition files, and our feature steps of a feature file are in different step definition classes, So it works pretty normal if there is that there is no constructor or a parameterized constructor for our step definition class. But if we are using a service class, or we are injecting some dependency like you guys have in your project to set the environments, and you are getting some basic parameters from the properties using Spring, I guess. So in that case, it will not work simply for some steps to, if they are in different step definition files, or we may need to add some dependency there as well.
Hi, Abdullah here again. I have another question for any of the presenters who can answer. Normally, what happens in APIs is there are two type of parameters: the path parameters and the query parameters. So, how are you differentiating those while building the parameters or the request? As because what I know that both type of parameters are in the file. So, how are you differentiating them?
Hi, so let me answer that, Umar. So we have a data file over here in which we are building up with the path parameter. Here you can also pass like query parameter, okay, and you can give your value like ID, and you can pass its like query value, okay, and you can say that value is 1. So when this path parameter is built, we have a customized utility which actually builds up the path parameters and then builds up the query parameter. So we have our utility over here. We have our functions of building the maps. One is query build query parameters, and one is building the path parameters. So it's our customized utility written, so whenever you pass with the name query inside it, so it actually maps as a key value pair in our path as a query parameter, and similarly goes for the path parameters. It's also those which are not starting from the query, it will automatically consider as a path parameter, and it will be mapped in our hash map automatically
Uh,
while reading the file.
Uh,
so,
Maria, as you can see, I believe this is the bean that's getting created by the Spring framework, right?
What is created by Spring?
The Spring framework, right? This bean gets created and then it's exported into uh, in your class where you actually have everything in where you're actually compiling the whole request, right? This
Yeah,
bean.
we have our utility that first reads the file, that is which I've shown, that is containing the data, and then we are calling this parameter building utility when before actually calling our APIs, which build up this utility actually build up a URL that is a path parameter, which may or may not contain the query parameters with it. So we have written it by ourselves, these utilities.
So I got that, but the class where you're actually using, uh, so we got that, but the class where you're actually using the parameter building utility, this bean is getting imported into that one, right?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, that is right.
Okay, so you have a function over here that actually does the clear for query params as well as path params, right? But if there's
Yeah.
a value in the header, I believe you guys are not clearing that.
No, actually, I've passed the things that are in headers and that are in body by myself in step definition when I'm actually sending the request. So I'm when this is actually built up, and then you can do that in your data files too. But I have done it in step definitions by passing myself the headers and the body. It's just according to your requirements and the conditions you may face.
Yeah, but my concern is that in order to let's say that there's a negative test case that you have as well, where you need to validate the presence or not presence of value in the header. In that particular case, you might want to introduce a header clearer over here as well. So the previous request, if a particular parameter was pushed and you want to run a case where you don't want to push it, rather than you have to explicitly clear it out, make introduce a function that actually does the clearing of header on its own, like we have over here, where it's actually clearing the query parameters as well.
Yeah, okay, yes, you can do that. I think so. Like, depends like how you want to do that. Like whether you want to have that data or headers in our data file, or whether you wanted to like pass it manually, or that is up to you.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
So Aksan, I have a last question. That is, can we perform performance testing of the API using this approach, or do we have to rely it on the JMeter or some other tool? Or can we integrate this approach with the JMeter?
Aksam, while learning for this project, I have seen one approach in which we send different requests of get, put, post, and delete, and there are many libraries which can help you provide assertions on the response times. So if you need to be very specific with your requirement, but if that includes asserting the response time, for example, you say it should be less than 250 millisecond or so, so that can be done here in this approach. But I'm not sure that how can we integrate it with JMeter and all that. But if you are talking about the response times and all that, and sending different requests in loop and comparing their results, yes, that can be done in this project also.
Okay.
Do we have more questions, or are we done? Are the slides done? Is the session done, or do you guys have more slides or a demo?
It's done.
All right, I think so. Hanan, if you want to share any comments, if you have any comments on any questions, like those were asked, please go ahead.
Comments I would just like to add. Like, I'll share my experience that all of these guys were fresh. They never had programmed before, and like quality assurance engineers, the new trend is that it's not like just the manual testing, it's the way to go, it's the future. And if quality assurance engineers have to sustain in organizations, they have to progress, they have to jump into it. It's the way forward, and learn new things. This way you'll be able to add more value to yourself, you'll have more things to add to your CV, and also you'll be more productive for the organization. So that would be my concluding remarks for all the Q engineers out there.
Makes sense. And I was actually, when the session started, I was thinking about that after these sessions are done, I think test engineering community, I'll talk to them or meet them, and I think we'll have to come up with a manifesto or next steps that, okay, wherever there is API testing, we have to make sure only rest assured is used and it's not done manually or in some other way. So I think some standards will need to be redefined, some standard practices will need to be redefined, so we keep on building in a fast pace towards automation. So wherever automation is available, only automation should be done. And I think we need to evolve from manual testing as soon as possible. And obviously, those are the next steps I'm thinking about. Some other people are thinking about it. Inshallah, I will work on them after these are done. So, Tajalle, up to you to wrap this up.
All right. So thank you everyone for participating today. Thank you, Aisha, Maria, Saman, and Umar for delivering such an informative session and actually delivering it really well. So for the most active participant, that will be announced shortly, and we will also be rolling out the question of the day for today. For the question of the day winner for yesterday, we will be rolling out an email also shortly. So yeah, that's it. Join us again tomorrow for another session on modern web automation testing. And that's all. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, Jalil.